if you don't honor something as sacred as sexuality and like the body, then it starts to actually kind of decay on a level, because really everything in life that is sacred, if you don't honor it, it starts to, I really would use that word, to decay.
And you mentioned earlier that the acknowledge, the ritualized acknowledgement of something like coming of age ceremony doesn't give that event or transition or that time in someone's life meaning. It acknowledges the meaning. It acknowledges that meaning does exist. And when you don't have that, it's not that there isn't meaning given to it. It's more that you're unmooring the person from the meaning. You're separating them from understanding the meaning that has. And so it's not just that like, oh, we don't give it the meaning, if the ceremony, it's just, it doesn't mean anything unless you have the ceremony. No, it does mean something. The ceremony acknowledges it. And since it does mean something and there is no ceremony, you have no way of acknowledging what it is. And it's that generational thing where, am I the first person to experience this? Is this like this for everybody? When if you have a acknowledgement by the culture, by the community, you're understanding, okay, this is how it happens. This is what we as my people go through.
Then this will be Make Art Not Friends episode number, which episode is it again?
Either 11 part 2 or 12 part 1.
Okay.
12.
So yeah, 11 or 12, let's say. Anyway. So the topic that we are going to talk about today is I hesitate to even say intersection because it sounds so sociological and social justice-y. The intersectionality. But anyway, yeah, we're going to talk about art and gender roles in society and sexuality and specifically media and specifically anime and Japanese animation, but also other stuff too. And we are going to dive into how, first of all, how, as we've touched on in previous episodes, the arts have shifted. We're not in the Medici era anymore. There are no Sistine Chapel ceilings, so to speak, to be adorned and decorated, and now we live in this digital age. And so the patrons of the arts, who are every bit as full of their own agendas and intentions as the Medici family was, or the patrons of the arts of that time, these current patrons of the arts, which would be these both individuals and groups, who have a lot of money in both Hollywood and in a lot of these shows and programs and stuff, particularly, I would say, what young people are consuming. They also have their own agenda. There's going to be a good bit of article reading, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what I really wanted to dive into is because in the larger conversation of we could go to take it back to a discussion on symbology. We could go to the divine masculine and the divine feminine archetype, which, I guess here on the mortal plane would reduce down to the male or masculine cultural role and the female or feminine cultural role, and what is expected of, right? Those are our two, regardless of what categories or things we invent with words, or how we want to be called, by what words, by what pronouns. Those are the two. If you went to the human dealership and bought a human, like there's manual and there's automatic, like that's that's the varieties that the stick comes in. Okay. And people can get all upset. But ultimately that's, if we didn't have clothes, right, then that shit would be all out there. It would just be on display. And it's like, oh, call me this, call me that. And it's like, well, I see you, I see the body in front of me, and my nature is to respond to that, because that's what we do as creatures in physical reality. We respond to our environment.
And it's the most simple, using those two words and the biological underpinnings, that is the most simple delineation.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to saying, instead of saying, my friend, that girl, Josephine or whatever, it's a lot simpler than saying, my friend, that non-binary, gender neutral, blah,
Yeah.
da, 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 15 other words. It even just has to do with the efficiency of language.
Well, and this is, I think, goes back to postmodernism, because we've thrown all of that out the window, and it's now just all about, it's like, it's almost as if it makes sense, we're not doing it anymore. It has to be some made up nonsense. But anyway, so we have, for a long time, we had fairly well, and this is not as true as it may seem at first glance, and that's a lot of what we're going to examine today. But these cultural roles were, let's say, at certain times more than others, but generally speaking, pretty clear cut. Okay, certainly in the more traditional societies where, certainly I would say in the hunter-gatherer societies, it was more or less. But again, it starts to get foggy. But basically, it was fairly clear cut, and then things started to shift a little bit. But so if you go back to Greece, for example, I want to sort of take this semi-chronologically. And you go back to and I think Greece and subsequently Rome, this is by no means saying that is the first example of, or the first instance of, what I'm about to describe, but because so much of Western culture is derived from Greek culture, Greek ideas of government, Greek ideas of everything, just philosophy, science, and the fact that they kept a pretty good written literary record of a lot of what went down, both in the form of art and in the form of more historical and historiographical writings, both in the case of Greece and in the case of Rome, which of course is sort of like a secondary corollary, if you will, of a lot of Greek stuff. And what we find when we look there is that we had these defined norms for men and for women, generally speaking. But what we find actually in Greece pre let's say Trojan War era, And I know that's seen as more of a mythological than a historical delineation, but um, so basically we had people looking up to the gods, okay? So as far as like how they should behave, and their ideals were mostly these archetypes, right, of the gods. And unlike today, the gods were not, it was not this like infallible, just immutable, impossible perfection of the infinity of infinities. It wasn't like that at all. The gods got into quarrels and they came down to earth. Sometimes they killed people, sometimes they got angry, they were petty, sometimes they were jealous. You know, they were very human-like and very fallible in their behavior, but nonetheless, they were seen as more or less paragons of the types of virtues that one would extol or like to embody in a human life. And so you would look up to them. And so in Greece, we had cultures like the Spartans, which were very well known for their military prowess. And they are sort of idolized by, you know, a lot of people these days, especially a lot of kind of like
you can say Gerard. You can say Gerard Butler fans. It's fine.
Oh, okay. So if I do want to share my my screen, how would I do that?
On the Zoom screen at the bottom, there's a little green
share screen
icon that should just, and then it'll pop up and ask you which thing you want to share. Make sure that the screen is not minimized to your tray, or it might not show up on the screen select. But
cool.
Once you select, and if you're playing a video or something with audio, there's a little share audio button, I think, that you want to click. But if it's just pictures, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Okay. So so one thing that I really want to emphasize is that I think the problems that we are having in today's society when it comes to sexuality and when it comes to gender norms and gender roles are connected to this idea that there is a quote unquote right way to be, right? Whether you are a man or a woman, that it's like, you know, like this idea, and it's honestly mainly perpetuated in American culture. I would say far beyond any other culture, where it's like this like weird, like macho, like football player image of like, that's what men are supposed to be. And likewise for women, this kind of like hyper feminine, like, you know, kind of like lipstick, high heels. And I think both ultimately are very much a caricature of themselves, but I guess that hasn't necessarily dawned on everyone. I think we're getting there, but and so everyone is kind of a shade of gray, and a lot of what I'm going to, you know, go into has to do with really analyzing the nitty gritty of that. You know, we're going to go into the anima and the animus, which are concepts introduced by Jung that have since been elaborated on, that really kind of get to the heart of, you know, what forces are at play within the human soul that cause us to just be so bound up with these things, and why they matter so much to us. And so, but going back to Greece, this is, I think, a good place to start this, because again, Greece is, we have stuff that's documented, right? Because I can talk until I'm blue in the face about the way things were in traditional societies or hunter-gatherers, but we don't really have a whole lot of recorded stuff from that time period. However, we do have recorded stuff from Greece. And in that vein, you have, for example, the Greek warriors, and specifically the Spartans, right? This was like the pinnacle of masculinity, you know? If you go like on any, you know, if you join like a neo-Nazi or like Aryan Brotherhood like forum, like these are, you know, like they tend to idolize Russian people, actually. I don't know why. There's like a big thing there. And they idolize, like the Spartans, it's like a whole thing, right? So with that in mind, and people have an idea in their mind, right, of what it means to be the epitome of this male archetype, right? I'm mocking here. What it means to be like at the pinnacle of this like traditional masculinity. And I think Greece is a good example because that's sort of when we started building up this ivory tower, right, of like this idealized masculine archetype. Okay, so with that in mind, this is an article from February 11th, 2022 about I believe it's called The Band of Thieves. Okay, so the Spartan army was renowned for its bravery and skill in battle. As it turns out, there was one enemy they couldn't defeat, an elite band of same-sex lovers trained in the fine art of dance. Circa roughly 376 BC, Theban officer Gorgidas had a life-changing epiphany, put together an army of homosexual lovers to battle invaders. The band was made up of 150 pairs of couples, each with an older gentleman, which was called Erastes, and his younger beau, Eromenos. All were trained in wrestling, dance, and horsemanship. It was their undying devotion to one another that made them so powerful. As Plutarch said, a band cemented by friendship, grounded upon love, is never to be broken and invincible, since the lovers, ashamed to be weak in the sight of their beloved, and the beloved before their lovers, willingly rush into danger for the relief of one another. The sacred band went on to prove their worth again and again. Their most notable battles included standoff with the Spartans. The sacred band took part in an epic standoff with the Spartan army. In a nutshell, they just chilled out on their high ground while the Spartans gaped up at them, unable to engage. When they couldn't lure them down, the Spartans eventually withdrew. The Battle of Tegira in 375 BC, the band was surrounded by a massive group of 1,000 to 1,800 Spartan soldiers returning home. They were outnumbered by more than 2 to 1. Rather than surrender, the group formed a tight formation and forced their way out, killing the Spartan leaders on their way. Oh, that's kind of gruesome. I'm not going to read that part. You can tell this article was written recently because it says, in a total baller move. I hate that. Battle of Leuctra in 371, Sparta officially declared war on Thebes. When the two met in battle, Thebes was once again vastly outnumbered. Luckily, they had the sacred band right up front where, yes, they totally killed it, pun intended. Thousands died, including the king. All good things must come to an end, and by 338 BC, the band's battle tactics were sorely out of date. When the Macedonians showed up to fight using a new long-speared phalanx, it was game over. Unfortunately, the sacred band refused to surrender, and all 300 members were killed. So think what you will, say what you will, but sound pretty badass to me. If they held their own against the Spartans, yes.
So I... There was a Saturday Night Live sketch, and I have it on YouTube in the background. There was a Saturday Night Live sketch where that exact concept was the sketch.
Really? Was it named like with Saturday Night Live?
It was Gerard Butler, who was in 300 when he guest hosted.
Oh, wow.
And they did this 300 sketch where he was trying to get them all to go into battle, and all the other guys were clearly effeminate and what's ambiguously gay Spartan soldiers. And so it was 300, and that was the joke, was that the soldiers were all involved with one another. And I just looked up when that aired. It was sometime in season 35, which is 2009, 2010. So I'm not saying that they knew that at Saturday Night Live, but that's just an interesting. They actually did a sketch that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trope. It
goes with what apparently, according to this researcher, was actually. It's just funny. As soon as you said that, I was like, that was an SNL sketch that I don't even know how I came across seeing that in the last couple of years. But as soon as you said that.
So here's another article about Greek things, also from about a year ago. Ganymede, a beautiful Trojan young man, was abducted by Zeus to serve as his personal cupbearer and lover on Mount Olympus amongst the other gods. Okay, Zeus carried off golden-haired Ganymedes because of his beauty to be amongst the deathless ones and pour drink for the gods in the house of Zeus, a wonder to see, honored by all the immortals as he draws the red nectar from the golden bowl, which is from Homeric hymn 5 to Aphrodite. Ganymede, or Ganymedes, was a young man from Troy. His beauty was unparalleled, and for that reason Zeus abducted and brought him to Olympus to serve as his cupbearer and lover. Ganymede's myth is an important step in the history of homosexuality. There's also a darker side to the story. Although none of the sources mention Ganymede's age, it is assumed that he was quite young, probably adolescent. Consequently, this myth can be related to ancient Greek pederasty. Godlike Ganymedes that was born the fairest of mortal men. Blah, blah, blah. So they don't mention his age. We were consistently told that he was beautiful and young. His beauty apparently was so great, so godlike, as Homer and Hesiod put it, that even the gods themselves could not resist him. So, etc. In particular, Zeus, the usual suspect of almost every Greek myth related to seduction and rape, decided that Ganymede was too perfect to walk the earth. Zeus transformed himself into or sent an eagle and abducted the unsuspected Ganymede, who was brought to Olympus. There he was welcomed by the Zeus, who presented him with an unprecedented offer to become his cupbearer, that is, to pour the divine drink called nectar into Zeus's and the other gods' cups. The job did not come without benefits. Zeus also offered to make Ganymede an immortal, blessed with eternal youth, serving in the banquets of the gods forever. So here we have a painting by Van Loo, 1767. So it's unclear whether, yeah, right. So, okay, so it says, although Zeus is well known for his multiple affairs, Ganymede is a unique case. There are not many amongst Zeus's lovers who were chosen to live on Olympus amongst the immortals. In fact, according to Xenophon's Symposium, Ganymede was the only one of Zeus's lovers to be ever granted immortality. So then Hera gets jealous, and I mean, honestly, this is a very predictable story. It's just, you know, the head of the Olympian pantheon finds a male lover, sex, and his wife gets jealous. Yeah,
Hera gets jealous.
So I thought this was really interesting because, you know, here you have Zeus, right? The god of gods, right, of the Greek pantheon, who, you know, if ever there was a point of striving, in terms of like an ideal or an archetype that people aspire to be like, you know, that's I guess similar to, and there are even theories that, you know, that Christ is just a rehashing of a sort of a Zeus character. Specifically, if you were to do, if you were to go into the etymology or the sort of linguistic breakdown of the name Jesus, which, since the J sound would not have existed in the Near East and in the Levant when, in the supposed time of when Jesus existed historically, that would have been, you know, that they say Yahshua, right? Because the J sound would have just been a Yah, and so that actually would break down to Yah Zeus, which literally translates to Hail Zeus. Jesus, Yah Zeus, Hail Zeus. So it's just an interesting thing to sort of tinker with, as far as etymology. But, you know, zooming back out.
And real quick on Zeus and Ganymede before you close this article. So Zeus in the Roman pantheon is Jupiter. Jupiter's largest moon is Ganymede. So that's not something that was like just, oh, this is just something out of the archaic past. Nobody cares about that anymore. This was so central to whatever story is being told that the moon was even, the most prominent of all of Zeus's relations, consorts, children, whatever. The largest satellite of Jupiter became known as Ganymede, this particular character. So just thought I'd point that out.
This is really interesting and totally unforeseen. It says here, please excuse my chewing. Many have said that the constellation of Aquarius, is Ganymede, who Jupiter, Zeus, is said to have made the cupbearer of the gods, snatching him up from his parents because of his beauty. So he is shown as if pouring water from an urn. Pseudo-Hyginus, Astronomica 229. The constellation of Aquarius could be Ganymede, according to the above and many other testimonies. Right, and then it's saying today, in post-medieval times, his name was given to the largest moon of planet Jupiter by the astronomer Simon Marius. I don't know. He doesn't look that young in this urn thing. Anyway, so yeah, then this goes into, so actually I will read this part because the pre-Socratic philosopher Xenophanes famously refuted Homer and Hesiod for anthropomorphizing the gods. Both Homer and Hesiod had attributed to the gods all things that are shameful and a reproach among mankind: theft, adultery, and mutual deception. Xenophanes did not believe that this was a par excellence Greek invention, but that all people fashioned gods based on their society. Ethiopians have gods with snub noses and black hair. Thracians have gods with gray eyes and red hair. If Xenophanes was right, then Ganymede's myth is more than a simple story. It is yet another piece in the history of ancient sexuality with particular importance for queer history, blah, blah, blah. If the king of the gods was allowed to have a male lover, then this certainly suggests a lot for the people adhering to that religion. So that's what I wanted to sort of get into. Also, if we ignore Ganymede's age, which, as we'll explain below, remains debatable, Ganymede's myth indicates that erotic relations between individuals of the same sex were at the very least tolerated. Yeah, and then there's other stuff about like how the Spartan army had like a relationship that was expected where like there's a lot of man boy stuff in Greece, I feel like, but that's just disclaimer alert, everyone knows that. But anyway, the reason I wanted to bring this in is because from our current cultural lens, right? How do I stop sharing my, oh, here we go. So basically, if you think about it, I think a lot of, I'm going to jump around in time. So let's go into the present time, shall we? So we have all of these youth with a lot of, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say issues. I think I would call them.
It's a pretty sturdy limb. I think you'll be okay.
I would call them issues because I see, some struggles. And so I would say a big part of why this is such a problem, and this is what I've noticed, is that this idea that because at least in American culture specifically, there's this period of rebellion, right? And we can argue about how much of that is a natural thing, how much of that is engineered, and I think a lot of it is really quite particular to and unique to American culture, because again, if you go to traditional culture or a culture where there is actually like a legitimate coming of age ceremony or ritual, that stuff doesn't really happen because there's no need to rebel, because everything is sort of like, that culture has all of its ducks in a row when it comes to, and because the need for a coming of age ritual, right? The need for that arises from the fact that there's a change going on. There's a mental change and there's a physical change in the body. And so there needs to be an accompanying cultural process or ceremony or container built for that. Acknowledgement, exactly. That's saying, hey, yeah, you're changing. You used to be like this. Now you're like this. What does that mean? Well, we'll tell you.
And this is normal, and not only normal, but something that
to be
everybody goes through it. And yeah, we all celebrate this together, as opposed to,
exactly.
Oftentimes it's the, you make fun of the kid whose voice is changing in middle school. You kind of poke fun at that awkward transitional phase because it really isn't identified, acknowledged, and like, yes, this is good. This is how it should be.
Right. And if for women as well, I mean, it's like, like you're a woman now, like, what does it mean? There was a ceremony, there was a ritual, and what ceremony and ritual does is it gives meaning to things, or it acknowledges the meaning that already exists within those things. Whereas I would argue a lack of a ritual really denigrates and like almost carnalizes, to use a word that I don't know anyone else has ever used, and degrades and really drains the meaning and the mysticism and the magic out of this very significant experience. And I mean, it's like, if you look at anything, like if you look at like, marriage, or, sexuality, or, or even like sitting down for a meal, creating some kind of a ritual or a ceremony. Like, why do we have holidays other than Christianity is a ripoff of paganism and everything is a pagan holiday? But we'll ignore that for a second. Why do we have these holiday meals? It's because when you come together with other people for a meal and you set aside time and you put your energy into making, all of this stuff and making it kind of beautiful and making it an experience, it's honoring the experience. It's the same reason that people, pray and they say grace and everything, but kind of holiday is more of a bigger deal than that. But nonetheless, there's obviously something to that, because, to the extent that everything is, mental, if you go back to the Hermetic principles, and, it's very important, the mindset, I would say it's deterministic, the mindset that we bring to things. It's very dangerous to not do that, to not honor and recognize and acknowledge the significance of something, particularly something as major as coming of age, because there's a tendency when something is not acknowledged or honored to enter into a sort of weird gray area where it's like, well, now what? I don't know who I am anymore, like because the first, few years of life, 6 to 10 years of life, you're kind of like, what the fuck is this place? Like, we're like, killing animals and cooking them over a fire. It seems pretty weird. Like, you're just kind of getting your bearings, and it's like, okay, all right, hold on. I'm like this. I have this hardware, I have this body, like I have this voice. If people are responding to me a certain way, there's these weird glyphs. We write them on paper. Like, okay, I think I got the hang of this. It's like this. And then all of a sudden your body starts changing and you go from this little like choir boy into a fucking Neanderthal with a square jaw and a gigantic nose, and you're like, dude, what the fuck is going on? Like, I only just
just getting used to that. That's the first thing that I was just figuring out. Now
my mid soprano. I was so proud of it, and then you threw me this cocktail of testosterone, and now
I sound like I'm on old time radio.
Yeah, now I need to start working on my Barry White impression or whatever. It says anyway, and it's a lot more challenging and trying of an experience and that's the thing, is particularly in America, like, you're on your own. Like, you're on your own, and you get things like sex ed, which is just really fucking disturbing on so many levels. The people in school are like, here's a condom and here's a dildo, like, especially now, and it's like, the pink trans binary unicorn had sex with the narwhal, and that's okay, whatever. But point being, that stuff, there's a, it's a very sensitive subject, obviously, but that's something that, if you don't honor something as sacred as sexuality and like the body, then it starts to actually kind of decay on a level, because really everything in life that is sacred, if you don't honor it, it starts to, I really would use that word, to decay.
And you mentioned earlier that the acknowledge the ritualized acknowledgement of something like coming of age ceremony doesn't give that event or transition or that time in someone's life meaning. It acknowledges the meaning. It acknowledges that meaning does exist. And when you don't have that, it's not that there isn't meaning given to it. It's more that you're unmooring the person from the meaning. You're separating them from understanding the meaning that has. And so it's not just that, like, oh, we don't give it the meaning. If the ceremony, it's just it doesn't mean anything unless you have the ceremony. No, it does mean something. The ceremony acknowledges it. And since it does mean something and there is no ceremony, you have no way of acknowledging what it is. And it's that generational thing where, am I the first person to experience this? Is this
Exactly.
like this for everybody? When if you have a acknowledgement by the culture, by the community, you're understanding, okay, this is how it happens. This is what we as my people go through.
Exactly.
And that connects you to something.
Yeah, that's right on the money. Yeah, the meaning is inherent in this. Meaning is inherent in absolutely everything. Yeah. And just to briefly bring this in, what you just made me think of is the experiments performed by Masaru Emoto on water. He showed that the worst thing that you can do is not scream at the water or shout curses at it, but the worst thing that you could do that would produce sort of the ugliest pattern to form in the water when it froze was ignore it completely, was disregard it and pretend like it wasn't even there. And so I think to apply this more broadly and to what specifically to what we're talking about, it is that, just pretending like, and there's nothing that will make a person quite so effectively feel totally and utterly alone than if this huge significant thing that's happening to them is totally unacknowledged. Maybe he does go to his parents or whatever with it, and the parents are like, I don't know, and it's again, it's the energy with which it is handled, if it is handled or addressed at all. What do you get? You get an awkward conversation with your parents where they're like, I don't know what to tell them, oh, well, when a man loves a woman very much, you're like, do this, and it's you'll figure it out. Or sex ed that's like, yeah, everyone should be comfortable handling condoms in class in 6th grade. Like those are two ends.
And who better to teach them than Rainbow Butt Monkey?
Mm-hmm. Right. And so just to connect this to what I was saying, I think that these myths, say what you will about Zeus and his male lovers and everything,
these all astrotheology, you realize, like, why was he the cupbearer? Why is it Aquarius? And why does he get carried away by an eagle? Where are Aquarius and Aquila, the eagle constellations? They're right next to each other. One's right on top of the other. They're constantly, Aquarius is constantly being carried away by Aquila, right, in the heavenly. So yeah, I mean, there's so many. It's and yes, maybe it is a tacit. That's one of the things about that article is it's like, I don't know how this guy knows that they were homosexual lovers, but I don't know that the story of Zeus and Ganymede, in that article, it said something like, it's a confirmation of the historical understanding of this sexual identity politic and whatever. Yeah, okay. You're thinking that the Greeks were telling this story to make young people comfortable about their sexuality. No, this is an astrotheological story about the sun and how it moves through Aquarius and how Aquila is connected to and why and how they move. So
you're 100% correct. I would say that it's likely to have been a little of both.
Sure.
Just because and this is
no symbols are one-dimensional, absolutely.
And I just looking at the ancient world, like that's why they use these symbols, is because if you try to talk about certain things like science or astrology to someone who is uninitiated without using a symbol or metaphor or analogy that they are familiar with, it's meaningless and they won't absorb any of it. And so that's why they meet in the middle, as above, so below. You use that intersection of like the human level of existence, and you use, so yeah, they're anthropomorphizing gods. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's an astrological myth, but at the same time, the reason that I chose that is because I think at the time in Greek culture, and of course, like, yeah, that dude in the article is like, this is, the Greeks are saying that it's, it was at the very least like a homosexually tolerant culture. And it's like, no, because they didn't have words they had words for specific roles. Like they had the role of like the active partner, the older, more experienced man, and the younger, more whatever, role. But those are actual roles. They're not identities, because identity doesn't fucking exist. It is a fiction. It's never existed, ever. But we have literalized and concretized and solidified it, particularly in the latter part of the 19th and pretty much throughout the 20th century. Forget the 21st century. Now we're just, I don't know where the fuck we are. Well, we're at the point where Rainbow Bunk Monkey is teaching you about condoms in 6th grade. That's where we are. Just, it's good to know. And so, and this is, I think it's really important to get this point across, is that when you get people to think that there is one specific identity that they need to choose forever, it kind of drives them a little nuts, because that's not how life works at all. People, like, you can't predict human beings. You just can't. Even like, even Kathy Cappuccino and Simon Sixpack can, like, listen to some fucking podcast and be like, wow, I think I'm gonna order some CBD and like start gardening. Like, actually, like, maybe the Bible's an astrological myth. Like, people come around and you can't predict their behavior. And so as a result of that, it's just kind of stupid to think that things have always been this way, or even not this way, but the way that they are in American culture. Because even like in the early 1900s, there was no such thing as sexual orientation at all. Like, that concept had not really been invented yet. The only thing that there was behavior, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what, and somewhere in the 20th century, we really broke that cord that stretches all the way back into the ancient world, wherein, and actually a lot of the research that I've been doing on Hebrew and the origin of language, in Hebrew, everything is based on actions, behaviors, and words, and verbs, I should say. And nouns are an emergent phenomenon. Nouns are verbs that have been changed into another form, not the other way around, as in English, where everything's based on nouns. The noun is the center of the sentence. And so it's a reflection of how the mind of modern people works versus the mind of ancient people, which is that we look at one thing or one behavior or one image of something, and we say to ourselves, or we decide, okay, I've just gotten this brief snapshot of, I don't know, of Andy over here. So now I know exactly who he is. I just saw him perform one behavior. He picked up a pen. Well, obviously, Andy is some kind of a useless, deviant pen picker-upper. He always will be. He always has been. He came out of the womb with a fucking pen in his hand, and there's no hope for him. He'll never be anything other than just a grubby little pen holder.
And it's funny that you said come out of the womb that way, because this is just kind of what I was, making a note of. So I'll save myself writing the rest of it down and just plop it in here. But the idea of, kids are, because when I was a kid, it was like the big stressor about choose your identity was what are you going to be when you grow up,
Right.
which I think now has fallen by the wayside to what are you going to have as your gender identity when you grow up, which has fallen by the wayside to, well, now that you're 12, you should probably, pick your one gender identity for the rest of your life. And I think, is that leading to, well, the thing that we know, science knows now that kids all come out of the womb and it's just a matter of time before they identify as what they biologically were, which is a narwhal, unicorn, gender diverse, whatever. So why don't we, knowing that it's just all genetics and they come out of the womb that way, why don't you go ahead and pick the way you want your kid to be before they're even, conceived in any sort of way? And how long before that becomes Aldous Huxley? And it's like, well, do you want your kid to be an alpha, a beta, a gamma, a delta? Well, too bad you don't own anything. The government's going to make that decision for you. And now it's just all, slowly, slowly, slowly. And now we wake up one day and babies are coming out of test tubes with predetermined social stratus, Brave New World.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, and right. And I mean, if you leave it up to the government, they're like, oh yeah, I know you wanted an alpha, but we're really focused on this, UN Agenda 21 eco craziness. And it's really important to us to drive home this idea that there's a population problem. So what you're actually going to get is a fucking non-binary purple glitter covered coelacanth baby.
Which is fine because they're not going to be able to reproduce anyway because we've taken the reproduction out into the hands of the scientists, the government. Yeah,
which is classic problem reaction solution, where it's like whatever the process looks like, the thing at the end is going to follow the plan that was decided before anything was actually even set into motion, at least on a public level. But what I wanted to say really briefly before I continue with my articles and stuff, this is definitely the most organized I've been for any episode, is that what's crucial to lay out here is that this is the first time in history, and I believe we used to have lots of high technology and everything. So I don't think the technology in and of itself is new. I don't believe that. I mean, if you look at any of this stuff, there's like evidence of really high level machining and whatever. It's a whole separate episode. But I do believe that this is the first time that we have had a material technology like screens, and because I believe, telepathy, I believe there's stuff about the human mind and our potential to communicate with each other that is totally at least lost or unexplored in our modern time. However, on a material level, I don't think that there's ever been a time when you could go on a screen, type some stuff, find an individual on the internet, and then read all about them. Like, for example, I have a classmate who I thought about him the other day because we were like best friends in high school. Maybe I had a dream about him. And I was like, I wonder what he's doing now. I feel like he's probably working for pharma. I just had a feeling, and I was like, I really want to know. Because I was so jealous of him, because I went to school for bio, and I was like,
mm-hmm.
It's like a sexy, like, oh, like I'm in Boston, like, oh yeah, like doing research, like I can't even tell you what I do for a living because it's so sexy. Like I work in this lab, like mixing chemicals, and maybe who knows what I'm doing. Like I can't tell you. It's just so important. I just get paid so much, and it's so important. I couldn't endanger myself by telling the likes of you, like whatever. So I looked him up. Sure enough, spoiler alert, he is working for pharma, and he recently started. I hope he doesn't watch this episode. There's no reason that he would ever look at it, but if he did, whatever. Hey man.
Well, we don't need to identify him by name. He can remain
anonymous.
No. The vast majority of people. It's not.
No, I'm not trying to dox anyone. And it's just crazy to think about. You can literally type in a name, and if you know even one identifying thing, everything about you is just listed like a bulleted list, like worked here. Well, especially if you have a Facebook, forget it. And so I think that those are the forces that are enabling this fixation on identity, is that you have like a literal profile. It's like, if if in Sumerian or Assyrian culture, there was like a a Rolodex of like cuneiform tablets with your fucking resume on it. It was like, who are you? Then maybe they would have had a problem with this type of stuff and identity and sexual identity. But the fact is, they didn't have that. They had, you go and you fucking grow the barley or whatever. Then you harvest the barley. Then you thresh the barley, and then it's winter. And like that, lather, rinse, repeat. Like maybe if you're lucky, you get to go have a feast. And maybe if you're really lucky, then you're the one who gets sacrificed and gets their fucking throat cut at the feast. I don't know. But what they were not doing is agonizing on the internet or writing long-winded, protracted articles in the Atlantic about the vicissitudes of how short-sighted our culture is to the plight of trans people.
Because and therefore we need to rewrite science in order to make it teachable to people that for some reason haven't had access to that or whatever.
And there wasn't time for that. And the thing is, I want to make it clear that like I don't discriminate against anyone. And I think whatever you on an individual level want to do, you're free to do that. And in fact, the idea that you're not free to do that is only going to make you pursue that thing more, because you feel disenfranchised and disillusioned and you don't feel right in your body and you're pissed and you want to disturb people and you want to piss them off and you want to unhinge them just like you feel unhinged because you were never given a coming of age ritual. And instead, you have this medical industrial complex that's like, I can save you. I've got a Rolodex of chemicals for you. Pick one, and then that chemical will save you. I guarantee it. And then God forbid you try to publish your story about how it didn't save you and you detransitioned, and then you're going to get fucking canceled. Because we can't have, like detransitioning is like the Me Too movement of trans. Like we've come full circle, And it's like, but it's not encouraged like that because it's too real, It's like you don't want to show the dark side of this thing that these think about it. I mean, you've got the vaccine and then you've got the trans stuff. It's a wet dream for the medical industrial complex.
Yeah, you thought they were making money off Ritalin and Prozac. You ain't seen nothing yet.
And that's the thing, and it is clear that it's a long-term agenda, but I just think it's so important because in the ancient world. And back in the day, or even like, let's say in like 1910, like I'm sure there were like dudes in the US Army, like whatever, getting it on when they were away from their wives, like because that wasn't an identity. That's like a well-known thing that happens in wartime. But the point is, it's when you take a behavior and you turn it into an identity, what you're doing is creating this totally artificial black and white that does not correspond to reality at all, because you cannot put people in boxes. And so creating that false binary, the only binary is there something dangling off of the front of you or not? That's like the only, yes, there's certain medical exceptions, right? But again, if we were all stripped down, it would be like, what do you got? Is it this or is it this? And so because that is covered, and I could go into all of the very deep Kabbalistic implications of you have nature and you have the natural world, and if you conceal the natural world, then you are actually already harnessing some of the power and the psychic energy of nature just by concealing it, because you're preventing that emanation. You're preventing people from interacting directly with nature. You could go back into the Garden of Eden metaphor and the covering and the shame and everything, and how tree of knowledge of good and evil. That could be like 14 other episodes. But the point is that it's true. Wearing clothing, and on a neurochemical level, right? If you were surrounded by naked people all the time, the novelty would wear off very quickly, because we are higher-minded creatures, regardless of how much time we want to spend pretending like we're not. And there's only so long, for most of us at least, for whatever, the more evolved of us, you can only exist in that animal nature for so long until you get bored of it. Because ultimately, that's one thing that's common to all humans, is they get bored of shit. We get bored of shit. We're constantly seeking out new and novel experiences. And that, I would say, really more than anything else, separates us from the animals. And so if you were surrounded by naked people all the time, it would wear off like really fast, because there's no suspense. Whereas in society, we're constantly surrounded by bodies, and we know, generally speaking, what's under there, but we don't really know what's under there. And so there's that suspense. And when there's suspense, when there is a gap between you imagining something and you knowing something, or you imagining something and you getting that thing that you're visualizing or imagining, that triggers the brain to start up the dopamine reward pathway, because you're like, oh, I don't have that thing, but I could. Well, what would it be like if I had that thing? Oh, I kind of want that thing. I feel like I want to pursue getting that thing. And so then, go ahead.
Well, you could see, just as from a literature standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the novels and stuff, especially the kind of the burgeoning, kind of Bronte sort of,
Right.
what was that? Victorian era
Oh yeah, that's when a
social
lot of that
novels, where it's
started.
like
Yeah.
she showed him her ankle, and that was like, oh my gosh, well, it's an ankle, but it's the mystery, the mystique of it. Oh, she showed 2 inches of the white of her wrist, and that was a big
And
controversial thing
again,
because of the hiding. Yeah.
exactly, the hiding. It's because, and what I would like to posit is that they're trying to keep people in this childlike state of mind, because in this vacuum, this cultural vacuum where we do not have a coming of age ritual, we actually never become adults in the first place in this society. We don't, because there is no, if you're in like a Lakota, or a Blackfoot tribe, like you do that ceremony, you have that coming of age ritual, and then it's like, okay, awesome, like wow, proud of you. Here is your adult membership card for the rest of your life. You are a man now. Don't forget it. We
Yeah.
don't have that. We don't get
And
that,
start acting. You better be acting like it.
Right. And then you're told what's expected of you. Whereas here it's like this vague, like, okay, let's see. I got a little bit of Saved by the Bell, a little bit of Boy Meets World. Where the fuck does that leave me again? Where all the actors are pretending like they're in high school, but they're actually like 28,
And
35.
you get this whole concept, this Facebook concept of adulting. Like being an
Right.
adult is now some like
And
concept
everything
that's
is,
foreign. Oh, I don't want to do that. That's adulting. Well, you're
everything is,
35. Just go take out the damn trash.
everything is caricaturized. But what I wanted to say too is that, first of all, yeah, the very notion of adulting proves that no one is really adulting, because if you're doing life, then you're not talking about it. And if you're talking about it, you generally are not doing life very much, as I can attest to. But what I want to really hone in on is that it's this notion that when something is, and again, this falls right back into the rebellion thing, and the reason that this whole topic is so important, the rebellious, permitted, not permitted thing, is because of that thing that occurs when a child comes of age, where it's like, it's unclear. It's that middle ground, that no man's land of like, whoa, hold on, what's expected of me? What's allowed? What's not allowed? I'm changing. My role in society is changing. My body is changing. Like, what is the way that things are supposed to be? And if people aren't told the way things are supposed to be, based on what's happening in our society now, it seems like everything starts to fucking fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
But what it was, so it's not, it's, but what is instilled on people from a young age, way before they come of age, is what is permitted and what is not permitted. So what is allowed and what's not allowed, or just more plainly, what's good and what's bad. And so nudity, aka your actual body, just literally not even what you have, but what you are here on this plane, is viewed as something that needs to be covered up, which implies, on a psychological level, that its existence is offensive to others.
Mm-hmm.
So all of our connections between us, and all of our relationship to sexuality, and any sexual encounter, liaison, or relationship, or whatever tryst or love affair that we have, is viewed subconsciously through that lens, that like, I am, by disrobing or whatever, I am unleashing this abominable thing that is extremely offensive to society, and dangerous, and just bad. It's just bad. And I mean, all the biblical stuff, especially when you take it literally, reinforces the fuck out of that. And so the underpinnings of our entire relationship to sexuality is that just by showing people yourself the way that God made you, you can really screw them up. Like you can really, and it's very interesting and very subtle and self-reinforcing, because then, you know, you talk about like nudist resorts and stuff, and how like that's on the one hand a good environment for deconditioning some of this stuff, but on the other hand, because we have all of this stuff culturally already, and it's made everything so weird and perverse and sexually charged, you can't, you know, take the spots off the leopard, you know, like, and so it's already there, and it's kind of like a chicken or the egg kind of situation. So it's very fascinating, because, and especially like I've been in that environment where people are not wearing clothes, and it's really interesting how quickly you start to reflect on just how fucked up we are as a society, and the things that we don't question and that we take for granted, and that we then like reinforce and essentially make apologies for, like, oh, well, you know, but then it's like, the reality is we've never experienced like life and being at one with nature and our bodies the way that it's meant to be, or that it could be, ever. We never have, if you've been born into this society, you know, and all of this, you know. And speaking of trauma, which we just talked about for 2 hours, you know, what is the primary emotional charge related to trauma is shame. It's shame, you know, it's fear and shame. And what is all this sexual conditioning? Fear and shame. So I'm gonna give you a chance to respond, because I'm sure you have a lot to say, and I want to take a bite of this food. And then after you speak, I would like to go into one of these articles and then just talk about trans stuff, because I feel like I've laid out enough exposition. What do you think?
Okay. Well, then maybe I will use this to kind of go into. This might lay the groundwork, I hope, for where you're going to go with it. But I'll do a little groundwork laying as far as what I think ultimately, and hopefully, like I said, hopefully this leads into what you're trying to say, but ultimately what the whole trans movement is really about, from a psycho-spiritual, and by psycho I mean psychological, spiritual, mystic, and even anthropologically psycho-spiritual standpoint. So the idea of the hermaphrodite is very central to many mystery traditions, many spiritual traditions. Can be found first, you know, maybe most notably at the Colossus at Memnon in Egypt, and the Egyptians were certainly made many of their gods, particularly the primary gods, had some hermaphroditic traits, or sometimes categorized that way. But you also find it in India. You find it in pre-Columbian Mexico. In fact, one of the most famous gods of the Aztecs, Quetzalcoatl, was a hermaphroditic god. Plato talked about hermaphroditism, the hermaphrodite, and psychology way back when Plato was doing his thing. You find hermaphrodite gods in Persia, Palestine, Australia, and I'm talking ancient Persia, Palestine, Australia. You find lots of reference to the hermaphrodite in the alchemical tradition, and particularly as it ties in with Mercury, and, you know, not just alchemical Mercury, but also the mythological character of Mercury.
Say, I fucking love you, man, because this is all the shit that I was going to say, but got too involved. Continue.
No problem. And then we go back to Jupiter, and Jupiter birthed from his head the hermaphrodite god Minerva, goddess Minerva. So you find hermaphroditism in so many of these ancient cultures. And I'm going to, I think I lost my, yep, I didn't put a bookmark in. Give me just a quick second to find it again. Real quick here, again, you know, J.E. Searle, Dictionary of Symbols. Highly, you know, this is my reference, but I have a dictionary, I have a thesaurus, I have a dictionary of symbols. It's, you know, to me, that's anyone who's interested in symbolism or astrotheology, or really anything, art for that matter, good to have this as a great reference for especially somebody who's very word oriented, to get the explanations of some symbols in a way that I don't always see them at first because I'm a little more linear. But there were some interesting things here I want to read. So magic religious thinking first stated this concept of the hermaphrodite in biological terms before clothing it in metaphysical or theological language, as in the revealed or non-revealed world. The andro, and we kind of talked about that. Very clearly brought out by occultist, I guess, the cult researcher Eli Starr, when he said that no happiness can prove satisfying until it is made whole by marriage, which is an imperfect marriage or imperfect image, excuse me, of hermaphroditism. And it can prove no happiness can prove satisfying until it's made whole by marriage, since the spirit always manifests itself as a segregated form in the world of existence, and this is a source of suffering and restlessness. It's connected with the problem of the sexes. Blavatsky, H.P. Blavatsky, says that all peoples regarded their first gods as androgynous. The first god, the prima deity, as a hermaphrodite, as an androgen. Because primitive humanity, this according to Blavatsky, primitive humanity knew that she had sprung from the mind, as is shown by Minerva, springing from the head of Jupiter. So we've got all this, the primacy of this concept of the hermaphrodite as being central to some aspect of the psychological, psychospiritual world. And when you then go into the whole, divine feminine, divine masculine, the divine child is the marriage of these two aspects, the ultimate goal of all of this, as people like Mark Passio, for example, has been talking about for years. And, he got it from Jordan Maxwell, who got it from, this has got a great track record of this is kind of a central idea to why hermaphrodism is talked about. This is the reason why hermaphrodism was talked about in all these cultures, in all these mystical traditions. It's because ultimately we're all trying to take our divided spirit, which is, like it said there, has emerged in this world, has been incarnated in this world, is segregated from its divine union. And essentially the experience of this plane is to reunite internally, psychologically, neurologically, spiritually, etc., on all, these different levels of existence, the divine masculine with the divine feminine, to create the divine hermaphrodite or the divine androgen. I think hermaphrodite's better. I think androgen implies the young androgynous boy girl, as opposed to the hermaphrodite being more of a developed, but nonetheless, so I'm going to stick with the hermaphrodite. But it's the idea of building the internal hermaphrodite in the sense of the psychospiritual inside the individual consciousness, and to unite the divine masculine aspects of consciousness with the divine feminine aspects of consciousness to create this hermaphrodite manifestation in this physical, real, existential world. And the whole thing that we're seeing now, and where this becomes perverted, is we're now looking at cultures saying, look, let's take that everybody should be doing, this divine marriage that should be happening internally in the spirit and the mind and the, and let's make this the heroes that society worships and the way that people should be physically, externally. So exactly. It's the perversion, you're taking the natural striving of this internal process, removing it, reshaping it to these external hermaphrodite heroes. I always go back to Justin Bieber because I'm very culturally out of it, and I think he's a man now, girl. But when he was first coming up to me, he was like, that's the hermaphrodite androgen pop star hero, at least of his time. Maybe Michael Jackson was that in another time. I really want to speculate because that was a little before my time and wasn't really too aware of Michael Jackson until later. Point being, I think for me, Justin Bieber is one that it's like, okay, young Justin Bieber is that hero, and that thing that's supposed to be us striving to do with ourselves is now taken away. We have no relation to that. We have no ceremony to connect us to that meaning. Instead, it's externalized and perverted and sold back to us. And that goes back to the alchemy of evil, which I feel like I talk about every other time I'm podcasting. But that whole concept of let's take something natural away, pervert it, and resell it to the people. And ultimately, what it comes down to for the physical level and for the controllers, the psychos who think that they can be God here on this plane and they don't have to play by the rules that are at work everywhere all the time, and they want to pervert them as much as they can, is the concept of Epi-Eugenics. And this is from, let's see, main 10. This is from Mark Passio's his definition of the fourth tenet of Satanism, which he defines as fourth tenet being eugenics. And
share your screen.
Epi-Eugenics. Oh yeah, sharing my screen. And so we'll share that. So Epi-Eugenics, a term which I, Mark, not I, Andy, have coined myself. And I don't know if I feel like he might have come to it independent. Anyway, regardless, this is just what a slide says. Epi-Eugenics is the propagation of eugenics by way of mind control and, quote, selective breeding. So that's eugenics by the very population which eugenics strategy is targeted to destroy. Or excuse me. So eugenics is when I am trying to target another population for destruction through selective breeding. Epi-Eugenics is that, but through mind control and selective breeding, and is propagated by the very people which the eugenics are trying to destroy, the eugenicists. One could call it getting the herd to cull itself. The gene culling strategy is seen most readily and most disturbingly in the rapid androgenization of genders in Western culture and the modern neo-feminist movements, ideologies, and practices. Perhaps it would be better to refer to the state of eugenics and epi-eugenics employed by dark occultists as dysgenics and epi-dysgenics, respectively. The reason that he puts that on there is eugenics means good genes, good in the Greek, genus, creation or genetics, genes, as opposed to dysgenics, which like dystopia, disharmony, is
out of balance,
is bad, or somehow out of balance. So, but that as you were talking, I thought I was just going through this presentation again for something unrelated, and I thought of this slide. But this is exactly, I think, the point of all of this, and I think certainly what comes to mind to me, and I wouldn't be surprised if you were kind of headed that direction as well. But I wanted to set it up in terms of, first of all, this is something that mystery traditions have been talking about and putting up as a symbol for how we should think about our spiritual progress, our psychological progress, our journey in consciousness here, to unite these two aspects, to make psychospiritually ourselves into one that has the properties of the masculine and the feminine integrated in a good, positive, and non-harmful to other people sort of a way. And this whole trans movement is to say, look, that's not supposed to happen on the inside, because how would you know it's supposed to happen on the inside? Because we've never told you about this being an internal process. But of course, nature abhors a vacuum. So anytime you aren't told about something that is part of nature, something has to fill that role in your life and your existence. And so here's what's filling the role. Turn that externally, worship the external, worship that. And then as you worship the heroes like the Junior Biebers, the young junior Justin Bieber, now you want to become that hero, like we've talked about time and time again, put up the hero so that people emulate the hero. And what ends up happening is, when Justin Bieber was young, which was 10 years ago or something, when a lot of these kids who were undergoing transition and banging the LGBTQ flag, or waving the flag, banging the drum, mixing my metaphors, when they are now getting to the point where they are told by society that they can choose their sexual identity and choose which fictive thing they want to now have to stick to for the rest of their life, instead of just, understanding, look, physically I'm this, but internally, psychologically, I mentally embody aspects of both and integrate both and become rather the cool thing to do is to make that external. And what happens then is you get a bunch of people that can't reproduce. And if you're a eugenicist, this is a total dream, because now you've got people, you don't have to do this kind of stuff like Edwin Black talks about in War Against the Weak in the 20s and 30s in the US and Europe, where they were actively castrating and even euthanizing people they didn't want to breed. Now you're getting them to do it to themselves, and they think that it is not only their right to do, which I suppose it is, but it's like the hippest, coolest, most socially progressive, most, it's good to support LGBTQ, but if you're in that community, if you're at the farthest away intersection of male and female and the farthest removed section of gender and identity as a narwhal, then not only are you a part of that community, but you're like the pinnacle of that community. And
yeah, you're like the edgiest, most progressive.
Exactly, the better. And the more you identify as a narwhal, the less likely you are to reproduce, because it's going to be hard to find other biological narwhals. And even if you did, I don't think a human identifying as a narwhal could actively reproduce with an actual narwhal, or even with another human identifying as a narwhal. I don't know how that works. I could be wrong. But
just to clarify, a narwhal is a real animal.
Yes.
A very rare one at that. I wonder if any exists still. That it's like a whale with a giant horn. Yeah. I just want to clarify, because I'm sure a lot of people don't know what a fucking narwhal is, but it's like,
I guess
a whale.
Not everybody grew up watching Freakazoid. He had narwhals on his show all the time. Anyway, cartoon narwhals, but still. But that's all I'm getting at, is that this is the total perversion of something natural into something unnatural, and in doing so, you get the added bonus of people putting themselves in a position to not reproduce and cull themselves. Getting the herd to cull itself is this epi-eugenicist goal, is part and parcel to the whole movement.
Let's look at some dark occult variants and groups. I could call this section Who Really Rules the World. Again, you have these public interface groups like the Church of Satan, which was run by Anton LaVey. Now I believe Peter Gilmore is the high priest of the Church of Satan right now. You had groups like the Temple of Set, run by Michael Aquino, who became a general in the Army, the U.S. Army. He ran the PSYOPs division of the Army, psychological operations, psychological warfare ops. Michael Aquino, Satanist, who considers himself a Setianist, as opposed to simply a Satanist. Set was the dark solar deity of ancient Egypt, who was the adversarial force who opposed the good solar deity Horus, who was about morality, and Set was about immorality. They patterned themselves after these dark gods, because that's who they fashioned themselves after. Some other groups that I was personally involved with, I was never a member of the Temple of Set, but I had friendships with many people who were involved directly in the Temple of Set. I was involved with an organization called the Order of the Evil Eye in Florida. And that's a lower level interface group like the Church of Satan. Also, there's I'm not sure if it's still in operation, a group in Whitehall, Pennsylvania, known as the Whitehall Church of Satan. And that group, this is this pamphlet here called Satanic Rites and Ceremonies, with a slightly different variant of the Baphomet on the cover of that book. This was an organization that was dedicated to human androgyny, to the androgenization of society, in order to destroy the established gender identification of male and female, so that people would be easier to rule. This is also a eugenics operation, not to belabor this, because I'm going to talk about it extensively at Free Your Mind. When you lower testosterone levels in a society, not only do people become androgenized, sex drives are lowered. So this is a form of culling the population. Not only male sex drive is lowered, but female sex drive gets lowered when testosterone levels are not at the proper optimum levels. Many people don't know that and think testosterone is something that is only in the male of our species, and it is not. It is critical for testosterone levels to be at a certain level for feminine sexuality to be normal. And there is a war against this chemical in the human body. There's a war on testosterone as surely as there is a war on cannabis. More so, okay? Because they want an androgenized population that isn't reproducing itself and certainly isn't standing up for itself, because testosterone is also the war chemical. You know, it's the chemical that's going to let you say the lost word, no. You know, because you're not going to take other people's bullshit. You're going to stand up for yourself and your rights when your testosterone levels are normal. They want a docile population, and they're doing that by eradicating testosterone in the population.
I really need to check out this presentation. May I just slip something in really briefly?
Yes.
So one thing that I wanted to say is that I think another thing that, shoot, I put a bookmark in here, I can't find it. Yeah, I wanted to say that just what I was talking about earlier with clothing, if you think about it, the other thing, whether you look at like the whole idea of sexual orientation, which again was invented, the trans identity, which was invented, because none of these things are identities, everything is a behavior. If you are backed against a wall and you know the Nazis have a bayonet at your throat, and then you pick up a rock and you hit one of them in the head, are you a murderer forever, or is there a Nazi with a bayonet up against your neck? That's a behavior that you engaged in that moment for whatever set of reasons that you felt that that was an appropriate behavior. And then life goes on. The Nazis aren't there anymore, and whatever, you know. And that's how things actually work in reality. But instead, again, I think because we are this digitized record-keeping society where it's like, aha, I have a snapshot of you performing a behavior, which of course we could get into the whole Epstein thing, and that's like apparently the entire underpinnings of our entire society is, aha, gotcha. That's honestly, American society in a nutshell could be summarized by that one word, aha, gotcha. And it's like, it's very kindergarten. And it's also, it's very kindergarten because what you do with a lot of this stuff, and in general, like it's really, if you take a step back and you look at the state of culture in general, where if you go on a dating app, right, whether you're whatever, these days, I feel like gay or straight, it's all melting into one giant amorphous blob, you know? But whatever you are, let's say you go on Tinder or something, and you go online, and again, when you're not just, you know, I don't know, in a different world, it would just be a person's photo. I mean, to say nothing of how messed up it is to be like swiping left or right digitally on people and what that does to people's self-esteem and whatever. That's a whole separate can of worms. But not only that, but there's a bulleted list underneath of all of these extremely private things that you really should only know about someone once you've really gotten to know them, which if you met them in real life is the way that it would work. But online, it's like, it's just crazy because it takes these things. And again, I believe that sexuality is sacred. Whatever you are doing behind closed doors, it's an expression of how you feel both towards yourself and towards your partner. Hopefully you're doing it with a partner. And you know, and the ancient people knew this, you know, and that's like, and actually I recently found out that the Kama Sutra texts had a very long same-sex portion that was completely left out and not translated by the very prudish you know, Victorian Anglo men that were like,
puritanical.
They were like, you know, I'm sure it was equal parts like, oh, heavens no. And like, how are these ancient Indians reading my mind of like what we're doing behind closed doors?
Definitely.
You know,
let's burn this. In fact, don't burn this.
Yeah, right.
Put it in my study. I will make sure I will burn it. Don't worry. I'll take care.
Exactly. But yeah, so I think to me that I see, I need to go over Mark's presentation, but I do see the dark occultist and sort of I don't know enough to say Satanist, but I'm going to say it. The strategy of these tactics is to take what is sacred and what is meant to be protected and kind of like just inner, and to draw it out and put it on display for everyone to see, thereby like profaning it, right? And sexuality is like the perfect example of all of that, because it's meant to be this beautiful, you know, thing, like the flower that blossoms at this particular moment when the thing is here, and it's all, everything comes together, and it's like, you know, and instead it's being not just commodified, but it's being turned into like the you know, like the back of a of a, you know, box of ground beef at the supermarket, where you turn it over and it's like, oh, okay, let's see, what's this? Okay, you know, 5'8", you know, 400 calories, you know what I mean? Like trans, non-binary, grass-fed, gluten-free, you know, whatever, Caucasian, whatever. Like, you know, that's what it is. That's what we do when we're online dating. You know, it's like, do I want the, you know, the gluten-free Jewish guy who's, you know, 5'5" and 400 pounds, you know, or do I want the cruelty-free, you know, transracial, biracial, you know, I don't know, half African guy who's 6'1" and identifies as a wood nymph, you know, on his off time. Like, that's where we're at, is like we're shopping for products, and it's made sexuality very similar to the relationship that people have to food of, oh, let's see, do I feel like consuming this in this moment, since I know everything about it just by being shown some data on a screen. Not that I want to go down this rabbit hole, but that's another thing about food, that all this compulsive labeling and standardizing has made people equate one product with another product when really it's not. And if you buy pasteurized, homogenized milk at the grocery store, you don't even know what the fuck you're getting. The milk from one cow is not the same as the milk from another cow. They're not meant to be mixed together. Like, it's, would you take a blood transfusion from 50 different people? Like, that's not how that shit is supposed to work. And yet it's like, oh, gluten-free, oh, it must be fucking healthy for you. It's like, no, you know? And so that's where everything is going, because of this corporatization of everything and the standardization of everything, as capitalism is taking its last gasping, dying breaths and trying to desperately prop itself up on a fucking walking stick made of, you know, the unbanked. You know what I mean? It's trying to extract the last few, you know, pennies from things. And I personally think it's, you know, it's not going to last too much longer. But this is really, it's all a symptom, right? And so now we have the commodification. I mean, we've commodified pretty much everything there is to commodify now. So now we're just commodifying people and human behavior and identity and sexuality. And of course, the medical system is there to offer a solution in the form of some chemical therapy.